Welcome to Transcending Comics, a podcast dedicated to trans representation in comic books, manga, and webtoons, both on panel and behind the scenes. I'm your host, Tommy, and before we get into today's episode, I'd like to tell you a bit about why I created this show in the first place. 2 years ago, I knew I wasn't alone among trans comic readers who were struggling to see ourselves represented in the medium of comics. Over the course of making this show, however, I've discovered a wealth of independent comics that speak truth to the trans experience and creators eager to tell our stories in comic books of all kinds. With that said, there are still stories about trans, non-binary, and genderqueer experiences that haven't been shared with the world before, at least not in this medium. Today's guest is someone that's actively working to change that. Their experience was featured in one of the first comics we discussed on this show, Fine, a comic about gender by Ray Ewing, though our guest was going under the name of Gerbil in that book. In the time since, they've continued to be a much-needed voice in sharing their experience with the world. If there's one question every trans person dreads being asked by folks they've just met, it's the question of surgeries. More specifically, it's the roundabout way of being asked, what genitals do you have? Today's guest, however, has been willing to share their own unique answer to this question right from the title of their new graphic novel, Bigenital Revolution, my very graphic guide to non-binary gender-affirming phalloplasty. This comic recounts their own experience as one of the first recipients of a gender reconstructive surgery that does not involve removing the sex organs present from birth, an operation that even many queer and trans folks aren't aware of as an available option in the realm of gender-affirming care. This comic is unlike any other I've read for this show, and I can't wait to share their story with you all. With no further ado, I'd like to welcome to the show the writer of Bigenital Revolution, Hyde Goltz. Welcome, Hyde.
Hello, hello.
So, Hyde, I can genuinely say that this is one of the most bold and informative stories I've read for this podcast so far. So, can you tell us a bit about what led to you sharing your experience in the form of a comic?
Yeah, you were right in that it's a question that comes up a lot. And I actually wanted to offer my own experiences up as a way to fall on that grenade for other people. Like, well, maybe if I'm open about my experiences, people will shut up asking other people about theirs. And a lot of it was done with, see, the funny thing is about the whole thing, I don't actually think that surgery is necessary to be trans at all. And in fact, I'm very against the idea that surgery defines you as real somehow, which would seem to be kind of counterproductive with what I've done. But mostly it was me pushing back against this whole idea that, well, what if you had both genitals? What then? And I was like, hold my beer.
So, what have reactions been like to the book so far as the audiences you've brought this to?
I've had a very warm reaction overall, and I'm very glad to say that because it's been a very delicate balance of who I tell it to. The big thing that I'm trying to avoid is that it escapes containment and goes into, the alt-right circles and the like, which Vice News did have happen with their article about non-binary surgeries that I was interviewed for. The wild thing is, as soon as that was published, I found out way later 12 different alt-right and conservative sites took the article, rewrote it so that they were getting the right pronouns for me, and changed the verbiage so that it was clear I was mutilating myself.
Yeah, that's so much effort to put in for no reason. That's
right.
Terrible.
Right. And for most people, if you tell them about the subject, there is kind of a carnival, what do they do? Kind of a allure to it. But I make it very clear that this was not for anything like, I was doing it because I needed to, not because I was jerking off to the idea. Which is, it gets messy when like so many people only recognize their experience through seeing porn. I know a lot of people who've done that. It's just, for me, that was not the reason that I had this surgery. It was so my insides would match my outsides for once.
Now, as far as better reactions to this book go, I'm curious to hear about like some of the convention experiences, or specifically, you had shared with me in our DMs leading up to this particular convention experience where you shared like a fellow congoer's reaction when they found out what this book was about. Would you be willing to share that with our audience?
Absolutely. This still sticks in my mind where they seemed upset at first. Like, you can't do that. You can't you can't do that, can you? And then they had sort of a blue screen moment for a bit, and came back saying, if that's true and you can do that, then you have to tell everybody. You can never shut up about this because you don't know whose life you're saving. And I've been in convention experiences also where there was somebody. I was browsing the dealer's den, and I was a guest at a con somewhere doing the artist alley shtick for one of the rare appearances I've made past the 2015s, where I was looking at the dealer's den and looking at the Pokemon plush there, and somebody recognized me because of my glasses, and they said, "You made that book about the surgeries, right?" And I said that, yeah, that was me. And he just said, "What Pokemon plush do you want? I will buy it for you. You saved my friend's life."
Huh.
And
That's so
I
endearing. Wow.
I have the Mimikyu that I named after the person in question. I keep it in a place of honor in my collection. It's you think that eventually you get tired of hearing the phrase "you saved my life," but it's not true. You never do. It's always just sort of like, I still don't know how to like reply to it.
Yeah, so is that, like, the specific audience you had in mind when you wrote this comic?
Yes, the ones that needed to hear it. Anybody who wanted to hear it, I was fine with getting that scattershot out there, but the ones who absolutely knew what it was like to think you are the only one of you that exists.
So, how long has this comic been making the rounds then, both online and in the convention scene?
Not very long. It was published March of 2024, I believe, or no, 2025. It was very recently. And I was hoping to get it under the radar before the new presidential regime rolled around. But Microcosm was very kind in pushing it ahead on the schedule. It was only supposed to come out like halfway through the year, and they said, no, we're doing it in March because that was literally the earliest they could publish it. I'm very
So,
grateful to them.
normally I wait till the end of the episode for this, but just while I have the listener's ear on that subject, where is the best place for people to get digital and physical copies of this?
Physical copies, that would be microcosmpublishing.com. I can provide the link for that if need be.
Yeah,
There
happy to
isn't
include it in the show notes.
there isn't technically a digital copy version yet, although that's mostly because nobody has said they wanted one. So if you email Microcosm saying, "Hey, I would like to see Bigenital Revolution without having to pay for shipping," they might do it. I have no doubt. It's just a
Hmm.
matter of I haven't asked.
Now, the comic includes some of your Tumblr posts about the experience from years before. Was that where, like, a lot of that recognizability in the convention scene during the 20 teens came from, like, from your
I
Tumblr
believe
presence?
so. Yeah. It was a sad day when they closed everything on Tumblr, and they reassured me at first that informational sites wouldn't get shuttered. But then sure enough, it got swept away with the rest of the things they considered trash, which was a
Ugh.
major blow.
Yeah, I've been adjacent to the Tumblr community over the years. Never, like, really active myself, but I've seen its rising and falling and rising a little bit again over time. So I hope it's a better ecosystem now, but I know social media is a fickle landscape.
I have decided to remain under my very cozy rock when it comes to most online communication, just because once 4chan finds your house a second time, you kind of get tired of it. Like you got to weigh, like, is this worth it? And a lot of times I am perfectly not hurting without it. But I know like Twitter deleted the Twitter. I'm rarely on Blue Sky or Instagram. Sometimes I'll scurry into Facebook and see what's happening there. But mostly I try and avoid that because otherwise the media is so loud that it's like I can't think. It's sort of like a shark that just has to keep moving and keep moving and keep moving. If you stopped and actually thought about everything going on around you, I'd just sink.
Now, counteracting the loudness of the current landscape, something that I found really interesting in Bigenital Revolution was your use of what I describe as like silent film frames in the comic and some of the like text-based pages. I'd like to know where you got the idea for this style of storytelling and like incorporating it into a comic.
I actually have a love for picture books, especially when things are used towards not necessarily towards children, but like for everybody. I love opening up a picture book and having the text on the one side and just something gorgeous on the other side.
Mm.
And I love how Jey, the artist for the book, just stepped up to the bat and knocked it out of the park, because Jey made my ideas look better on paper than they did in my head originally.
Okay, so that was more from like picture book storytelling than silent films.
Yeah, that's what I had in mind when I did it. Although that's interesting to see it in silent film context. I like that. That totally works too.
Yeah, I think maybe it's your cartoon self that leans into that, because like your cartoon self in the comic kind of looks like the queerest version of someone that would be tying a woman to train tracks in an old silent movie.
I could see it. That I actually do get stopped in fast food restaurants every once in a while because somebody is making their kid apologize to me for calling me a Disney villain.
How do you feel about?
I'm a little honored, to be honest, because I love me a good Disney villain. I love the over the topness. I love the memorability that they have, even if they're considered the villain. Like my shirt that I'm wearing now, it's from this obscure thing from back in the like Death in the Family era Batman called Brat Pack. And the villain of that was this guy called Dr. Blasphemy. This was his logo. And it was all based on, like, he was the only one in the book telling the truth. So they labeled him the villain.
Huh.
It was just in a system that was so fraught with failure from every adult. And then a bunch of sidekick superhero teens trying to do their best among everything.
That's a bit of Batman lore I've never come across before. I never would have guessed.
It's not actually Batman. It was a parody of it, of sorts. I will say it holds the title of most bleak comic that I have ever read, and that's saying something with my library. Like this it gets dark and does not let up even through the finish. But the images that it instilled in me were very stark, and it kind of stuck with me long after I was done reading the comic.
So, do you recall the name of that?
Brat Pack. It was. I liked the idea of a villain that was the only one telling the truth.
Huh. Yeah, no, and that's just like among children's media. That's peak queer representation right there, especially like the '90s Disney villains. Like,
yeah,
just glad they can recognize us.
Yeah.
Now, you've been described as someone who tells stories for people not seen as real. And like from living with a non-binary presentation before we even had the term non-binary in common queer vernacular, to telling your own unique surgical experience, to also being very outspoken about your own lived experience with DID. Can you tell us a bit about how this became a common theme throughout your methods of storytelling?
I have had so many people not get me initially. And so a lot of my writing career has been, how do I translate this into something that the rest of the world is going to be able to understand? I've done quite a bit of like amateur fanfic writing over the years. I ended up having to abandon everything. So it's all like on orphan accounts on AO3. But I enjoyed writing for different characters because the most common comment I would get was, you write like you're inside that character's head. And a lot of times people would say, I get how this character thinks now. Just because I got so adept, I guess, at just trying to get my point across to someone who has no context for it.
Who were some of the fan fiction characters that like you really found that voice for or resonated with?
I kind of glommed onto the ventriloquist from Batman the Animated Series like a lamprey and just never let up. Most of the ventriloquist fanfics out there, they were probably me. It was the earliest representation of DID that I had even seen before. And it was kind of kind of a bittersweet relationship because I knew that something was going on in my own life that kind of paralleled what the ventriloquist and Scarface, his dummy, were going through. But it's not as though I was champing at the bit to be called a Batman villain. And that was literally the only representation out there for DID when Batman the Animated Series was on, was just sort of like, oh yeah, you have Two-Face, the ventriloquist, and Psycho. That was it. So it wasn't like when my therapist at the time, I was only like 18 or 20, something like that, was saying like, these really sound like DID symptoms. I was like, nope, couldn't be me. And just kind of denialed my way out of that. There was like a resurgence of symptoms in my high school years. And then I sort of just, it's explored a little bit more in one of my works where I just put that whole part of myself in a box and walked away.
Would you ever consider making a comic about your lived experience with DID?
I might. And as a matter of fact, it's still, I mean, we're all works in progress. That goes without saying. But the timing of this interview is really interesting to me. Interesting maybe in that way that, Minnesotans use the word interesting. But I just found out, I've known since I was 38 that there were actually two of me at all times. But it wasn't until like 2 days ago that I realized there was actually a third part of me that had locked itself up. And like they go by it pronouns, I asked, but they are hell-bent on not being contacted directly. Like they are hiding something so dark that they don't want a name. They're adamant about not having a name. They consider themselves to not have a face. It's basically like a crayon drawing from a kid with a blank face. And it's heavy, heavy stuff. I have just been kind of going touch and go with this and acting a lot like I did when I realized there were two of me, where all of a sudden this whole new section of the map opens up in my inventory. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to rush into this because I have no idea what I'm up against this time around. And it's just like I have an open mind for the experience because I have been through so much that it seems a lot of other people haven't, that this is just the next step of the line.
I think it almost goes without saying that you have a very unique lived experience, as well as a clear knack for storytelling. So as far as what you are able and willing to focus on or like bring light to in the realm of your works, I would love to know what other stories from your life you hope to share in the form of a comic.
That's a good question, and I hadn't actually considered it. I got done with Bigenital Revolution, and that was the only project I had on the horizon at the time. Most of my days consist of tooling around in the Has-Been Hotel fandom and trying to get my disability case pushed through. Right now I'm on try 4. That is one thing that I don't think has been mentioned. I don't mind who knows, but I took a blow to the back of the head back in January 2023, I think it was. And since then, I was in my last semester of becoming a mortician. So like everything turned upside down from there. I had to relearn how to walk, how to talk. Thankfully, that's gotten back to me. It's just that suddenly I had a whole lot of free time open up, and all these people who had seen the Vice article that had just come out that winter or fall said, oh, you should write a book about all this. And I was like, well, I have all this free time now. I might as well. I have been laying down some tracks and things that I would like to do in the future. It's just right now I'm kind of grounding myself for just getting through this patch of it. And I'm a firm believer that some days, months, years are just bridges to times that don't suck. So I'm willing to play the long game.
That's the most pragmatically optimistic thing I've heard in a long time. And this year especially, ever since the Orange Man took office again, I've heard this described as it's like America's going through its own little dark night of the soul. So seeing this as one of those shitty years that's the bridge to something better is, I think, really the best we can hope for right now.
I don't mind saying it that the part of me that I owe the most to is 2004 me. because that was the year that I had just moved up to Minneapolis. I got a little apartment that nobody knew I was co-renting with somebody. Oops. But I was so overcome with anxiety that in the same week that I moved up here, I shuttered myself away in my bedroom and just didn't leave the apartment for the grand majority of the year, because I knew that if I stepped outside, everybody would recognize that I had no idea what I was doing, and they would point and laugh at me. It was just like knowing the world is flat. Yeah, I was so adamant about something that was completely incorrect. When it came to 2004 me, that was where I sort of built the idea of there are years that are bridges to a better time, because I had no reason to think that anything would ever get better from there. I just stayed in my room afraid. If it wasn't for 2004 me, I wouldn't have become Hyde. I wouldn't have become Jonathan, taken a name for that part of myself and gone out into the world as a man for 10 years. I would have lost so much progress and just life and joy that I have now. I never would have had that if it wasn't for 2004 me just keeping on going, even though he had no reason to.
I think that's a really important message for our listeners too, since I've known so many folks, and especially in the trans community, that like find themselves in years where it feels like things have stagnated, or maybe they've started to realize that they might not be cis, may not have that identity that like reflects their fullest self, and they just feel stuck and they feel stagnated and like this is forever. But knowing that even your bad years are just a bridge to something better, I think is maybe the best note we can leave them on. So thank you for following up with that.
Oh, yes.
As far as that, like those moments of self-development and realization go, after you would listen to It's Morphin Time, you would share with me a bit about your own first experience with something akin to ego death after what I can only describe as a heroic dose of marijuana edibles. And I'd love to know how that experience has shaped your outlook on the world and your creative process. And, I think it might be best if we start with a basic overview of that experience for our audience.
Right. I love telling this story. But one of the parts that also has never come up in most of my appearances is that I am a practicing chaos magician, and I owe that all to my 40th birthday, where, again, I was in mortuary science college, and the rest of the students found out that I was turning 40 and I had never once gotten high. And they were like, "Oh, fam, we're going to fix that." So on the day in question, I was delivered by one of the students a big box of what turned out to be ridiculously powerful edibles. And I didn't know how to weed at the time, so I ate the whole box and texted the student, "Okay, I ate them. What happens now?" And they replied back just simply, "Oh no," and never talked to me again. Like I'd never. I don't know if it was out of I don't know. It was funny to me though. But the experience in question, it was a ride, because I actually saw existence slow down to individual comic book panels. I guess that's just how my brain translated that for me. And I did what I now know is kind of a rookie mistake. If you ever come up against something like that, I looked between the comic panels. If you're ever high enough to where the world slows down to comic book panels, do not look between the panels, because that's how I met the Fae. And there were two of them that noticed me. They were on horses, but they were kind of, the horse and themselves were the two Fae. It's kind of hard to, it's hard for me to translate some of this stuff, but they said, "We could end you, And I was just like, yeah, it's just dawning realization. They said we could make so that no one could say your name. And I'm just still spellbound by them. And they said, "But it is your birthday and there are rules, you see. So we'll let you go." Then I woke up what seemed like 3 days later, where all of time was swapping in and out of order, it was such an experience that I got super into the work of Grant Morrison, actually.
Oh, hey,
Because
they
that
were the last guest on the show.
yeah, really? Oh my
Yeah, that
gosh.
was the most recent episode before this one.
Oh, I have to look that one up because, oh, that makes me so happy to know. Yes, it was, that's how I got into magic, and I'm so grateful that when I tried writing a letter to Grant a few years ago, they actually replied back because they had said a few times that, like, if there are any superhumans out there, please contact me. I'd love to meet you. And I said at the beginning of the letter, I can't claim to be a superhuman, and then I said what the Fae had told me I actually was because it seemed relevant. That was, you can cut this part if it doesn't really match with everything else. But the Fae, when I was talking with them, they were talking amongst themselves and saying, oh, shouldn't we let them know? It would be such fun. But one of them told me that I was an idea when I'm not a human. And it was, they referred to me as the benevolent uncoincidence, which is the fancy pantsest way to describe basically like improbable inevitability. And as far as I'm
Mm,
aware, as soon as I'm done, like I am no different than anybody else. I'm getting this demo version, experience of being a human. But when I am done being Hyde Jonathan Goltz, I will go back to being this idea. I have no way of proving this. People can believe it or not, but I do think that might be why I have such a soft spot for the idea of ideas in general and why I'm so defensive of things being considered real that many people don't consider real.
that's such a fascinating epiphany, and like I can see the truth underlying it of like, I mean, what is anyone once they're no longer living but just like an idea or a memory? And I guess even before you're born, like to one's
Yeah,
parents considering having a child or finding out they're about to have a child. You're not a person yet, you're an idea.
yeah. I'm quite literally made of love, and it's been kind of heartening to realize that. Um, it's changed my worldview ever since, and I have been so open minded for learning new things when it comes to in the magic community and outside of it. The sky is not even the limit. It's amazing what experiences there are to be had in this reality and in the others beyond this one. That's one thing that I've known in some of my experiences with the magical world since starting it up a few years ago. I was told by someone that, there's the third dimension that we're aware of, where it's a matter of height. And then there's the fourth dimension, which is time. Time is linear. And then the fifth dimension past that is scale, where suddenly distance just
Mm,
doesn't matter anymore. And you can individually be aware of the concept of something like a million.
mm.
It's the sort of thing that's hard to prove when you chalk everything up to it. But I do believe that logic and needing to put things down on paper and say this is a fact is kind of one side of a coin, that magic lives on the other side, where you go with like dream logic and what is not physically tangible, the things you can't write down.
Yeah, like I've always liked the idea of magic as imaginary numbers, of like
Exactly.
things like the letter I in mathematics, or to some extent even like pi and other theoretical numbers. So it's like
Oh
I
yeah.
can't give you this in a physical form in the real world, like in and of itself, but like we just plug this into this formula, all of a sudden we
Mhm.
get real world results. What does that
Yeah.
mean? Yeah, or
And
like
that's
on
that's basically what magic has been for me, is that it is non-quantifiable and it is not describable in, say, a recipe form. Because the one thing that's been the same throughout every experience I've had is the moment I start saying, this is how you do magic, it stops working for me. It's like the Michigan J frog thing, where as soon as you show people what this frog can do, it just sits there and goes, "Nah, nah."
hmm,
As soon as everybody turns their backs, it's up and hopping and singing and dancing. But gets very frustrating when people need facts and logic and it doesn't operate that way.
Maybe that's like some kind of fey safeguard of like, hey, if you can write this down and profit off it, it's a very short, like slippery slope until you become
Oh
a
yeah.
cult leader. So like we're
Yeah.
gonna make it only work when no one's looking and you can't prove it. But
And
like,
I understand, like, some things you got to keep safe. The beautiful things of the world, there are that's one thing that I am very adamant that no matter how bad things get, there are gorgeous things happening all the time, but they are so quiet and out of main sight that people don't think of them. Like today,
mm,
a baby walked for the first time, and it was amazing. And I didn't see it, but it's out there. I mean, things happen for the bad all the time for no reason, but I like to think that sometimes good things happen for no reason too.
yeah, a coincidence, luck, like it can benefit everyone equally.
Yeah. I'm always a fan of a good uncoincidence, I like to say.
As far as like within Grant Morrison's work or even elsewhere in other pieces of media, I'd like to know where you first started to see your otherworldly experience represented in the stories or other media you were seeing. Because I remember that was huge for me, like coming across things and finding out, like, okay, others have experienced this. There are words and language to describe this that I've just, if you had told me the word before I experienced it, ego death wouldn't have meant anything to me. But, and like, I can't describe it to someone very accurately who hasn't had one. So, like, I'd love to know what finally made you feel seen or like there is representation of this experience. I'm not alone.
There is a scene in The Invisibles, and I can't remember which volume, but I can point to it and say that's what it's like because they are suddenly aware of the comic panel boundaries. And one of them has such expertise with them as to be able to seemingly phase in and out of reality, but really he's just walking behind the panels.
Mm,
And
yeah.
it was so close to what it feels like in a way that I could recognize that I was like, oh, there's something to this. And then with that keynote speech that Grant gave at the one
DisinfoCon.
DisinfoCon, yeah, about like you read the books, you do the things, it works. You got to do the things, but it works. I read Grant's stuff and tried it on my own, and the way that I first did so was trying to contact the spirits of Pokemon, of the favorite Pokemon of my nearest friends. And I asked if they would agree to be my friend's guardian beasts. And, signed a pact, did DIY'd basically a protection spell into a Pokemon card that I would then laminate. And I gave those Pokemon cards away as gifts on my birthday a year after I met the Fae because it was my birthday. So I figured I could do all the magic I wanted.
Hmm.
But the Pokemon spirits were very personable. They loved being thought of as like actual spirits. And I will say that for a lot of fictional characters that have global awareness, it's a new kind of folk spirit, I think. It just
Hmm.
hasn't been quantified that much yet. But especially when the media is years and years old, it's not being added to anymore. A lot of my experiences have been with beings that have no physical form that would be thought of as fictional, and they're like, finally, someone believes us.
Hmm. Yeah.
Again,
And like,
it's hard to get this across to people without sounding like the village crazy person, so I generally keep it to myself. But it is fascinating and a rabbit hole that seems to have no bottom from my experiences in the past 4 years.
yeah. And that evolution of ideas, or like we might call them thought forms, like that's something that I feel like we have as a society seen this play out before, like as media
Mhm.
gets older and older and then gets collected into like Bibles or collections or like the
Mhm.
stories become folk tales or something passed along. And
Yeah,
I,
I would posit that there's sort of a symbiotic experience going on between the realm of ideas and the realm of humans. Because without any ideas, we humans wilt on an individual level. Like if we don't have anything to believe in, there's some part of us that just dies. But I think that humans are sort of the repository for these ideas, where that's how they manage to reproduce and go out into the world is being an idea to many people. having more
Yeah.
people believe in an idea would just increase the amount of ideas.
Yeah, like in the Magical Experience podcast that you were on recently, I know
Oh,
you
no.
talked about the idea of a life cycle of ideas and how they
Yes.
grow from being something that just lives within an individual person to something that takes on a life of its own when it's shared among a collective and can like outlive its originator.
Yeah, it doesn't happen often. I can say that for sure. There's so many stories that have been lost, whereas we still know about like Sherlock Holmes or Ishmael. But yeah, not to get too off in the weeds.
There are some things like that that people are just unaware of how these things have evolved. Like my favorite example of this is the human Raymond Palmer, or Ray Palmer for short, who like was this science fiction writer that was all about like taking the experiences that would just be considered like lapses in mental health to others, or like publishing
Mhm.
schizophrenic experiences in the realm of fiction, or being the first to publish UFO phenomena experiences, like actual firsthand accounts, and coining that.
Interesting.
This person who was like only 4'2" or something like that due to a childhood accident would go on to be the namesake of the DC Comics character, the Atom.
Really?
And
That's
yeah,
fascinating.
it's
I, di-
something
I I learned something today. I love it when I do that.
I've mentioned this in other podcasts, but there's a book by Dr. Jeffrey J. Kripal called Mutants and Mystics that, I mean, if you like Grant Morrison stuff and like this relationship between otherworldly experiences and the people that have shaped science fiction and comic books and pop culture, he has a great like 30 or 40 page retelling of Raymond Palmer's experience that goes completely into this and how like humans and ideas eventually become angels, who like elevated angels are gods, and like these gods can become like creators.
I love
And
that everybody is trying to find words for the same experiences, it seems like. It's almost like that story about the blind folks and the elephant, where everybody's like, "No, an elephant is long and skinny like the tail." Or it's a trunk thing, and it's just like, "Well, that's technically a part of an elephant, but yeah."
and like here's this Raymond Palmer guy who he was the editor in chief of I think it was Amazing Stories, which was one of the two premier science fiction magazines. Like he went from making a fanzine to like making science fiction and the UFO phenomena community what they are today. And
I am
this
so excited
person
to learn about this.
then goes on to like not even put himself in a comic, just inspire a comic book character, a comic character that's now outlived his namesake by years and will continue to outlive him for as long as the mainstay DC Comics characters are relevant. And this idea that he's the Atom, he's like this source of truth or knowledge in the smallest possible form, and like some kind of god of communication in a sense, because he can travel through telephone lines, which was also like part of his origin story. Or like Gardner Fox called up his friend Raymond Palmer to be like, "Hey, you mind if I name this character after you?" He's like, "Yeah." So tickled by the phone call, he's like, "All right, this character can travel through phone lines." And like it's
That's
seeing
what I'm
this
talking
person
about.
grow to become the very kind of mythos he was publishing. Like he was telling stories of like, "Hey, does Superman walk among us? Like we saw the Superman from Krypton crash onto Earth in the 1930s. Now it's like early 1950s, and we're hearing about little green men crashing here in Roswell, and the government can't get its story straight about what happened." And so now this person would go on to live in the same world as Superman. That's such a weird form of like self-fulfilling prophecy. And
Right.
like I have
I'm
been
squealing
obsessed with
about
their
this.
story ever since.
You like, I feel like my metaphorical tail is wagging. But
Now,
yeah, I will state, like, for the record, that when you do a lot of work with beings without physical forms, like taking care of your own mental health and making sure that you have your foot in reality, at least one side of you, is just vital. Because
mm,
when you start thinking too much about, like, well, what is real, what is our perception, you kind of go down the rabbit hole so far you get lost. And so my therapist, who is an absolute gem, has been very careful to make sure that I do a lot of grounding techniques after magic that takes place in the sort of things that I'm describing, that I know that what is considered real by the rest of the world and what isn't, just to make sure the guardrails are in place. Because I will say, when I first admitted to my psychiatrist that I was seeing these things and communicating with them, I was told that I needed to go on massive doses of antipsychotics. And it was actually a combined effort by both my therapist and my MD at the time. My MD wrote a very touching letter that said basically, this person is sort of like Emperor Norton the First, where they have one foot in a reality that we can see and one that we can't. And our job is to make sure they are safe in this reality. We cannot go farther than that. So they both said, please take this person off the antipsychotics to the level that my psychiatrist had been putting me on. I can't remember that entire month because I was on such a high dose.
Oh,
It did
like,
not help me. And yet regular maintenance was paramount when it came to making sure that I don't get lost.
yeah, I think having the healthy outlet for it is also like paramount to maintaining this relationship to like what's outside of consensus reality. Because my
Absolutely.
personal view is like, as writers and also like as artists, magic is kind of objectively real, at least in the sense of like magic is creation. Magic is taking ideas from somewhere else, sometimes things that don't originate within you or that like
Mhm.
just come to the fore from different things coming together in your lived experience and bring them out into the world. Like, I can write a story about a new piece of technology and publish that, and now my life is fundamentally changed by whatever I put in this story, whatever ideas I gathered from the world. And now I can use ideas or like some kind of magic to change my standing in this world. And with the
I've heard it
example
called
of
hacking.
technology, yeah.
I've heard it called hacking the source code of reality, and I think that's kind of one of the best ways of putting it.
Yeah, like then we see things like Star Trek and Star Wars informing the way technology advances in the real world from that kind of inspiration in fiction, or things that are objectively not real become objectively real
Yeah,
because of the tales and the stories we tell.
I think it's no coincidence that I would have a hand in being one of the first people to have the kind of surgery that I have, because I am so much about, well, why can't it be real? That
Mm.
that I would make that idea a reality, given, the circumstances that I was able to do so.
Tying that life cycle of ideas into your own Fey epiphany of you're an idea when you're not human, I'd be curious how you bring these two ideas together, how you balance that of like being given this life cycle of ideas and then given the idea of like you too are an idea. Like, how do you feel that shapes your view of reality and the way you tell stories?
It actually kind of makes me feel like Steven Universe in a way, like metaphorically. I'm not saying that I'm a fictional character, because I know I'm not. I'm Hyde Goltz. I am this human like every other human here. But it does kind of strike me as that I can do things as someone who is recognized by some of these other beings as an idea when I'm not like this. It seems like maybe that's why I have some of these insights so easily presented to me, is because they see me and they can, oh, well, they're one of us, kind of, but they're being the human right now. So,
Hmm.
so now I can kind of, it's again, I've tried explaining human behavior to some of these beings without bodies, and they're sort of left with the same reaction that I get among a lot of people when I try and tell them what I do for my magical experiences. It's just sort of like, huh, yeah, okay, I guess.
It's like that Steven Universe idea of being an experience, which I
I
happen to
would like
know
to
is,
be a good experience.
yeah,
I
something
try.
that you've identified with. Like, I know you've talked a bit about your relation to the idea or the character of Stevani in Steven
Hmm.
Universe and how that's helped you navigate like having alters and integrating them into one. And is that anything you'd like to share with our audience today?
I would. I am basically, very simply put, two parts in, like, I'm basically a young girl and a young man in a trench coat deciding to work together as this person named Hyde. It was a careful negotiation process over several years where the part of me that was Heidi, the little girl I was born as, and the part of Jonathan, which was basically the twin to Heidi that she broke off in a moment of terror. She didn't want to die alone, so she made a twin so that she wouldn't have to be. And then that twin went on to actually live another 10 years after burying her as like too much trouble to keep maintaining. It's very hard to distill this down into an elevator pitch, but essentially, once the Me Too article of my ex-mentor, who happened to be famous, came out in the press, that was like years and years ago by now, the Heidi part of me came back because she held so many of the memories of that time with my ex-mentor that it turns out like Jonathan could bury her as far as he could, but that didn't mean she was gone. And now this part of me comes back that has all my memories from before I was 17, because before then there's like the linear version of my backstory that makes sense and everything goes from point A to point B and it's all alphabetized. And then there's what I like to call the canon version of events, where I woke up in bed, I was 20 years old, and I had no recollection of what happened before that. Just that I was a guy because I wasn't a girl, and everybody kept calling me Heidi, and I didn't know why.
And I like to think a lot of people can relate to at least the experience of having like a first conscious memory. Like I have a very specific point around my 4th birthday that I remember being like the moment I was like self-aware, and like that I see it as my first memory, even though I have little glimpses of like vacations and the other moments before that. This was like the story of me starts here, or like this is I'm aware of I'm a person.
Yeah, and as Jonathan, I had none of that. I had the age wrong. It's actually when I was 17, I woke up in bed, everybody calling me Heidi and not sure why. But when I was 17, I had to be told from then on, like, what school I went to, what the name of my old friends were. I didn't know. And it would have been so much easier and made so much more sense if somebody had just told me, oh, there's actually 2 of you. One of them's been buried this whole time. It would have made so much sense, and I could not have gotten it spoon-fed to me that easily, I don't think. I wouldn't have believed it. It took something catastrophic to kick it off, and then that was the moment when apparently Heidi felt safe enough to reveal herself.
Do you think understanding and accepting this would have been made any easier if you had real representations of DID and experiences like this when you were 17, or had access to find things like that?
Oh, absolutely. I think it would have been it's a little frustrating to me nowadays to see how much information is out there and how easily it's shared. And none of that was available to me when I was younger. So it's almost like I had a 20-year delay where I was just trying to find out what the words were for things because they hadn't been invented yet. It's there was actually a character in Hazbin Hotel that shook loose the grand majority of Jonathan's repressed memories because of the very similar life circumstances that the character had to what Jonathan had been up to and then summarily forgot about. I'm very good at compartmentalizing kind of to a fault. And every time I unlock some new memories, it's like a new section of the map opens up. And it gets kind of tiring by now. But I know that this is how I needed to be able to get as far as I have. Because if there weren't those other parts of me that were guarding the such negative experiences, like unfiltered, I don't think I would have been able to go on, honestly. Like if you've lived through enough horror movie style experiences, you kind of have to sit with them for longer than immediately to be okay with them. I hope this is making any sense.
No, this makes sense, and I've been kind of blessed too. I've been producing Arden Lee's podcast these last few weeks, and she's had some incredible experts like Dr. Katie Keach, Dr. Jamie Merrick talk about experiences with DID. And like, yeah, this fragmentation of memories, or like these alters being something that our minds can come up with as a means of like continuing to function despite living through something unthinkably horrific. So
That
so
was
far this checks out to me.
Yeah, that was well, it's the easiest way to explain what happened was that this moment happened when I was very young, and I only refer to it as the terrible secret of space. I only vaguely allude to it in my poetry zine about my backstory. It was the moment where Heidi thought she was going to die and didn't want to die alone, so she made a twin, and that twin she made a boy because she figured if she just made another girl, she was always going to keep losing to men. And so a boy who could be someone that she was not. And when she thinks of herself as like, well, I can't do this, so I'll break off and make someone who can. It's like an emergency escape hatch that I'm glad most people don't have to deal with this. Honestly, it's very messy. It's very messy, especially when we didn't have terms for how this stuff works. The being of Hyde that I am now is essentially a fusion of both Heidi and Jonathan after they discussed things and like gradually opened up their secrets to each other over the course of several years. They chose the name Hyde based on some deliberation, and Hyde was actually the nickname that my parents had for Heidi. They say like, here, Hyde. So it was kind of an olive branch to that. It's not that I'm Heidi anymore, but I'm something recognizable.
Hmm.
Like that part of me is still there.
I was curious about the choice of Hyde as a name, since like, yeah, the first association I have is Jekyll and Hyde.
Jekyll and Hyde. Yep. And a lot of
Hmm.
people do, and it's easier to get the baristas to spell my order right, just like Jekyll and. Um,
Hmm.
it is kind of funny that you could say basically that Hyde won in this particular Jekyll Hyde situation.
Hmm.
But yeah, Hyde was the amalgamation. It was my Stevani version of just making things a little simpler
Hmm.
as best as one can for the situation.
Well, Hyde, I'm so grateful to you for sharing so much about your lived experience today, and for being willing to get so personal with this.
This has been
Um,
great.
yeah, it's been lovely having you. You have such an interesting mind, and I really do hope we get to see more of these lived experience in comic form. Especially, come on, that marijuana edibles experience you saw between the comic panels. You've got to put that into some dang comic panels.
If I find an artist willing to cooperate with me for it, I have had nothing but lovely experiences doing so with many other artists in the past. So anybody who's willing to take that on, you know where to find
Hmm.
me now.
As for like our closing wrap up question, I like to tailor to our guests. My question for you this week is what queer fictional character do you find yourself most identifying with, preferably within the last year or so? Since I know you have Stevani and a couple others, so I'd love to know who's the recent person you see yourself in.
I know absolutely who it is. It is Angel Dust from Has Been Hotel. And that is because I'm very glad that I was able to go through the therapy that I did after seeing episode 4 of Has Been season 1. Because my friends joke, oh, that's that show that made you have a mental breakdown. I went into episode 4 blind. I didn't have a warning in the beginning of it because the way I was finding it. And so I know that Angel Dust means a lot to many people. And for a lot of people, he is the first example of representation of like a messy queer person that is allowed to be messy and still is like, this was one of the first examples that I'd ever seen of someone with a backstory like mine who was allowed to be a protagonist. And I know that I'm not the only one who's like that. Like there's a button sharing project that I was a part of, the IRL Angel Dusts Club, that I might start up again if I get more buttons. It's a little button that says IRL Angel Dusts Club, and then around the top it says you are so much more than your pain, and along the bottom it says and you are never ever alone. I've been handing those out to Angel Dust cosplayers for free at conventions since I got into the community. And the reactions I get from people, like I have had people break down crying. I asked them to hug me. just seeing the rawest parts of them brought up in somebody opening up their soul and saying, I know, right? So Angel Dust was very helpful in getting the memories of my 20s and 30s back when I was a heavy alcoholic, drug user, desperation sex worker, and then repressed everything. Those memories came back after seeing Poison, which was like being kicked in the head over and over by how many things had happened to me in that song. It's a music video. And like I even wore one of the same outfits Angel did at one point. It was so surreal that I just I needed to see more. But my therapist was very kind and agreed to watch the rest of the episodes with me so that it wouldn't have any sort of jump scares like that. She was like, well, this makes sense because Heidi had secrets that she needed to eventually trust Jonathan enough with. So it makes sense that Jonathan would have secrets that he didn't trust Heidi with yet either. And I managed to get back the memories of my 20s and 30s and process them through, they're called Helsonas. I love that there's a name for them, where like an original character that's supposed to be you in that universe. I came up with a Helsona named Benzie at the prompting of my therapist, because she said, okay, this seems like a good sandbox for you to explore these memories and be able to process them in a safe place. And now that I have done all of that, I was able to watch season 2 and just enjoy the show, not have to worry about therapy afterwards. It's been great. But yeah, I owe Angel Dust a whole lot. And I'm glad that the queer representation for messy gays like myself is like finally starting to take root with characters like him.
And I want to commend you on being able to channel your fandom roots into your work in a way that like helps spread this love to others, right? Seeing oneself there, like, yeah, not just identifying with a character, but like creating the buttons and like helping others know, like, hey, there are others like us. Like that, I think is such a powerful component of your work. So I'm glad you're able to still take your fandom roots and find a healthy, constructive way that you can still share that with others and how you create things going forward.
There's been an underlying theme of all my work I've noticed, that the worst thing that I can think of is for somebody to be alone and not know there's anybody like them, because I've known where that place feels like. I've known, you know, I'm not a boy or a girl, I'm something else, but that doesn't exist, right? All the way to, well, I know I need this surgery, but it doesn't exist yet, right? To it just comes up so often in my work, the not being sure if you're real in making friends in the afterworld. Anything that I can do that helps someone who feels alone feel less alone, that's what I'm going for. That is how I consider myself to have been a good experience. So that's what I'm trying for here while I'm here.
Well, hi, thank you again so much for being with us today. One more time, where can our listeners find Bigenital Revolution, and where can they stay up to date with your work going forward?
Okay, that would be microcosmpublishing.com. Just look up Bigenital Revolution, and you can find a copy there. It's actually a good idea that this was brought up about a digital copy, because I wonder if I could float that idea past them. In terms of any other works going forward, the easiest way would be to follow me on Instagram or Blue Sky, though I will mention that Instagram is primarily just cosplay photos I have. And Blue Sky, get ready, there's a lot of porn on there. Just go in with a band of NSFW, the hashtag, and you should be fine. But just there be dragons, I'm just going to say.
Oh, and one last note before we go. I know you had told me about a project that's particularly close to your heart in Sparkle's story. Would you like to take a moment just to tell us about Sparkle's role in your life and where they can learn more about her going forward?
Absolutely. Sparkles-story.com has a series of infographics that explain what Sparkle is, what help they can offer to the trans and non-binary community. They are, the easiest way of putting it is an egregore that is essentially the embodiment of trans and non-binary joy alive in this world. And it was a 2.5-year long project to try and figure out a way to get Sparkle to a position where they actually could affect our reality, even if it's just in little nudging ways. I did so much research. I met so many people and learned from them so much that this project is really from the heart, a love letter from me to the trans and non-binary community of the world. Sparkle exists, is out there, and is a fountain of self-love and wanting to become your favorite version of yourself. If you don't have the love in your heart to get you across that threshold, Sparkle is offering their time and presence to nudging that along a little.
Well, I can think of a few other things I can get behind as much as spreading trans joy and non-binary joy and spreading that out into the world. So I'm happy to include a little bit about Sparkle in our show notes, point people in that direction. And if there's one idea or thought form we can help spread through this show, if it's the embodiment of trans joy, then I'm happy to add that to today's episode. So thank you for sharing a bit about that and for everything we've discussed today, Hyde.
It's very much appreciated. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for listening to Transcending Comics. If the listeners at home have requests or recommendations for comics or creators you'd like us to cover in the future, you can send them our way on social media. You can find us on the Transcending Comics Instagram and Facebook page, on Twitter as @TranscendComics, find me on Blue Sky as @TommyTrimbath, or email us at transcendingcomics@gmail.com. We'd like to thank you for giving our podcast a listen and give a special shout out to Ray Day Parade for designing our logo. Our intro and outro music is A Little Soul and You've Been Starring by Carlson. Check out more of his music on carlson.com. If you'd like to support the show, please leave us a review on your podcatcher of choice or consider supporting us on the Keymaster Collective Patreon page, the recently launched production studio behind Transcending Comics, Giant Sized Violence, and other upcoming podcasts and various other comic book projects. Join us again next time as we continue transcending boundaries and exploring the colorful world of trans, non-binary, and genderqueer representation in comic books of all kinds. As the curtains fall on this episode of Transcending Comics, remember that comics have the power to inspire change in countless worlds, including our own. Keep reading, keep writing, and keep transcending.